So Kenrik Duru and Hawkin were two recipients of this award over the past 2 years, and they attended leadership development seminars sponsored not by us, but paid by us in part. And I want to thank them very much for bringing what you learned in those seminars back to our faculty. And Dr. Levy, who is our former dean, our dean emeritus, recently wrote a book called Never Be Afraid to Do the Right Thing, a leadership guide in an age of change and challenge. And this one is for Hawkin, and this one is for Ken, as a gift from Dr. Levy, personally signed. And I'm sure that if you want to purchase it, it's available on Amazon or probably in the bookshop. And you can call them and ask them how they enjoyed reading it. But he's got a lot of pearls for leadership. So with that, I'm going to actually turn the program over to our educators for the evening.
Good afternoon, evening. Thanks for coming. I'm Kenrik Duru, as Dr. Gordon said. I'm an associate now, newly so, in the Division of General Medicine Health Services Research. And I'm glad you're here because I think that means you want to develop your personal leadership skills and style. It's something I think that is it takes work. It's not inherent. It's not necessarily natural. It takes thinking and acting and doing. And my hope today is you'll be able to think about one particular issue, at least, that you have, and think about ways you can improve or potentially compensate for it to make yourself more effective in being a clinician educator or a researcher or whatever your primary mission is. So I'll tell you one thing that I have been thinking about is how to best transition from being in a research team that works very well to developing my own unique research niche. And so that's something that I've been thinking about and why I went to the course. And so I'd like you guys, we were going to have people go through and give one issue that was important to them, but A, it may take too long, and B, we don't want to put everyone on the spot. But if you can think about one thing in your job that you feel like is something you'd like to improve upon as a leader, in this talk we'll be going through ways to kind of conceptualize that, think of ways to approach it and deal with it and improve. So I'll also say that neither Hawkin nor I claim to be experts in this. So this can be more of a discussion, but we're happy to share with you things that we've learned from the courses we've been at that may help. The other thing I'd like to say is there are leadership courses that go on for a year, every 2 weeks for a year. A lot of it is introspective, thinking about yourself, keeping a journal, doing readings, trying things out, seeing if they do work or don't work, coming back. So by no means in one 3.5-hour session can you really change everything. But the idea is to spark interest, and certainly I can speak for Hawkin. We would be happy to talk to you about what we went to and how it helped us if you wanted to do a similar thing, maybe with Dr. Gordon's help and some subsidy from the Dean's office. So I think with that, I'll just go into an outline. Oh, of course, we have to thank Isadora. She might have stepped out right now. Yeah, for really helping a lot with the slides and preparing the materials and getting the room set up and getting the food and all that for today's session. So in terms of the agenda, we have started by asking you guys to complete a self-questionnaire on leadership styles, and it really has 3 potential leadership types, and some of you may know that this is one way that these have been grouped. Other people have different categorizations of 4 or 5, but at least for discussion's sake, we'll stick to these 3, which are autocratic, democratic, and laissez-faire. They also have synonyms, but we'll describe them more in the talk. And I think hopefully completing that gave you a sense, if you didn't already know, of what style comes most naturally to you. According to the people who designed the survey, if your score is 40 or above, that really is your predominant style that you operate out of probably most of the time. If you have, for example, 2 that are equally high, maybe in the 30s or the high 20s, you may be someone who actually works comfortably out of both of those. And if one is very low, that may be one that you really doesn't come naturally to you, and you may have to work at. Because as I'll get to in the talk, I think they say all great leaders really are able to use all 3 of these styles when circumstances dictate. So after this questionnaire, which we just did, we'll have a short talk, and I should say more of a discussion, because at any point, please stop and ask questions if you have them, on leadership styles, on managing up, dealing with people who are I guess, your boss or the person you report to. And then we'll stop and have what hopefully will be some interesting and fun breakout sessions to role play vignettes. So we have several different vignettes. We're going to have 2 intrepid people volunteer to play the role of someone who's a faculty member in your position and someone who maybe is an RA or a resident who is doing something that really isn't necessarily helping the team, and role play ways to work with them. So again, that's one small part of leadership in terms of interpersonal relationships, but obviously role plays where you sit and think about things don't go over too well. So for this interactive session, we picked the kind of things where you would interact with someone else. And hopefully that'll be helpful for you guys. And then, of course, at the end, we'd appreciate any feedback you have and to complete the evaluations, which we definitely will read and think about going forward. Before I continue, so we're going to break into 3 small groups for the vignettes, those being number 1, clinician educators, number 2, clinical or health services researchers, and number 3, kind of basic basic research investigators. So if I could just have a show of hands to get a sense of how we break down. Clinician educators, how many folks do we have? So maybe 9. Okay, what about clinical health services research folks? So about 5. And then basics, maybe? Okay, fair enough. And then basic science folks, labs, so, okay, good. So looks like we have enough for at least 3 moderately sized groups to role play. That's great, that's what we were hoping for. So just to begin, these are some of my favorite leadership quotes, of which I think really tell us something about what leadership entails. First one, John C. Maxwell is one of those kind of professional leadership guys who writes books and makes a lot of money giving talks to companies and talking about leadership. But one of his quotes that I like and easy to remember and really relates to me is where it says that a leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. So as a leader, you obviously have to know, the strategic plan for the organization, for your team, for your lab. You know it, but you also go the way, so you're there with them. You're not completely from a distance, not participating. And then you have to show the way. You have to show them this is where we're going. As a leader, you know what's going on, you're participating, and you're showing the group to give them some guidance and vision as to where you're going. The second one is from Jack Welch, who people probably know as the former head of GE, I think, who said that before you are a leader, success is all about growing yourself. And when you become a leader, success is all about growing others. Which really, means that once you're leading a team, the team only goes as far as you help the members grow and develop and improve. So it's not so much about what you can do well and doing what you can do well. It's getting other people to do things well. And then as a team, you'll achieve more than if it's just you doing stuff and them not really being sure. So it really, mentorship and leadership obviously go very close in hand. And then finally, a real leader faces the music even when she doesn't like the tune, or he doesn't like the tune. So I think leadership is always easier when things are going well. All the patients are doing well, the med students are happy, the residents are happy, you're getting grants, you're writing papers, you're head of your division, loves you and all that. But when things aren't going so well, your team is a little bit dysfunctional, there's complaints, there's issues, that's when I think it takes really the test of a real leader to be able to step up and at least make a concerted effort to address the issues instead of kind of hiding or just putting on a happy face and not really getting to the root of what's going on. So those are some things to think about in terms of what leadership entails. So as I mentioned, there are the 3, for this discussion anyway, 3 styles, and people should now realize kind of what one they most naturally fall into. We'll talk about them now. So laissez-faire, you can see, he's just kind of hanging out. I guess leading from that position, and the autocratic king of the jungle there, things go my way all the time. And then the democratic leader who is, taking a lot of opinions in to get a kind of a majority consensus, and then maybe influencing that a little bit, but at least incorporating quite a bit input from the team. So laissez-faire or delegative leadership style, characterized as hands-off, really the opposite of autocratic, and really very dependent on your staff, your employees, your team, your residents. Certainly very useful when the staff is experienced and highly knowledgeable. When you have people who know exactly what they're doing and they're very good at it, it works very well to say, okay, this is what needs to be done, you know how to do it, go for it, I'm here if you have questions or issues, and things will tend to get done. When the staff has high drive to produce, for whatever reasons, be they job satisfaction or other things, camaraderie or just any other reason they're really internally motivated. When your staff are experts in the field that you're working on, and when you trust them, when you're able to believe that they will do ethical, quality, hard work when you're not looking over their shoulder, which, as we know, is not always the case, unfortunately, in certain situations. Conflict, you have problems. So your staff is maybe, not all, but some, or all, are new or inexperienced. They really are not going to do well with you kind of standing back and letting them just go. When feedback is needed, jobs where it's really important to touch base on a regular basis and get thorough, good feedback. If you're not there, it's hard to give good feedback if you're distant from the team. And then finally, if responsibilities are not clearly defined, because then when you say, okay, I'm laying back on my iceberg and you go, if it's not clear who's doing what when, you're going to have problems in the long term. So a lot of this style really depends on who you're working with. So autocratic leadership style, the leader dictates the methods and makes more or less unilateral decisions on how the team is going to go forward. And there's generally very limited employee participation. This is often useful early on. Maybe if you have July 1 resident and intern and medical student, it might be good to be very autocratic at that point and tell them this is how we're going to do it, and this is how it's going to get done. When you have unexpected tight deadlines, when the RFA comes out on short notice from the NIH and you just have a month or 6 weeks to turn the grant around, you don't have a lot of time to just delegate and hope that things work out. Sometimes you have to be a little more autocratic in those settings. And then when there's little margin for error, very serious situations, if you're running a code, obviously, like I think many of us have done, that's not the time to delegate. It's time to really get in there and make sure it's done the way that you know that it needs to be. Problems or conflicts, staff can certainly develop resentment pretty quickly if this is your main operating style. It can lead to high staff turnover. If you have people you value, and certainly I think, speaking for myself, RAs that are wonderful are a treasure, and you hate to have them leave if you're really riding them in an autocratic way all the time. And then decisions are less creative, which is really important to think about. So at least in the business world where a lot of this comes from, some of the best decisions are kind of thinking outside the box. And obviously we all know a lot, other people know a lot as well, and bringing them in can help lead to better ways of doing things, new ways of doing things. And if you're making decisions all the time yourself, you may think those are great, but there may be a better way that doesn't come to the surface because you're not allowing that to happen. So you really get less creative decisions, which in the long run, may hurt your team or your research project or your program. And finally, a democratic leadership style. So characterized as leaders who offer some guidance, but then solicit a lot of input from generally most of the members of the team. But they tend to reserve the final say on decisions after a lot of discussion, deliberation, weighing of thoughts, discussing of pros and cons. And so this tends to work well in settings that need complex decisions, things that are not very straightforward, and it may increase the morale of staff. Some studies show that staff who are given the chance to weigh in, as long as it's done in a truly democratic fashion, as opposed to letting people talk a lot and making autocratic decisions that it's obvious don't really take into account what people have shared or suggested at all. And then the main conflict is that it can take a long time to get to a decision. And so if some of you are thinking that, my research team is not working as well as it should, or my house staff team is kind of getting overwhelmed and not really getting to where we need to be, maybe part of that is due to just a little too much of democratic style and weighing everyone's thoughts and opinions before moving forward. So hopefully some of this resonates with folks in terms of what you're doing. And I will say, I think it's in the next slide, that all these are important. So each of these three styles can be effective, and the best leaders in interviews have said that they really can transition between all of them at certain points. They can deliberately make decisions. I need to approach this in a more laissez-faire style, in a more autocratic style, etc. And so I think if your goal is to be the most effective leader, it would be good to practice these strategies, the ones that don't come naturally. Consciously think about using them in certain situations where you think that they may be particularly valuable. Because I think it's the natural way is to just do things the way you usually do them, but I think the best leaders are able to assess the situation and change their style based on the needs of the team and the situation. So I think some of the best group leaders have talked about starting in the democratic style, and then over time, once they gain confidence in the team, get a sense of how things are working, transition more to the laissez-faire style over time. And that, of course, is probably the case for a lot of full professors with long-standing research teams who have R01s that are on a machine and they're going. They're able to pull back and do other stuff and let the team kind of go. But doesn't happen overnight. That takes, I think, a while to get that system in place. And it's also been noted that being unable to turn to the autocratic style on occasion can lead to decreased productivity. I think there are always situations that come up where it's important to be able to say, look, this is the way it's going to go. For this situation, discussing it, of course, but this is why it's going this way and this is what we need to do. And I think being able to do that is a real skill and talent and something that will serve all of us well as leaders. So the next, I'd say 5 or 6 slides are really drawn from this book, which you see the footer on the slide, and there's a reference of the book later in the text, which really I think is very helpful. It's called For Your Improvement, and it actually is designed to go along with this extensive self-survey that points out kind of your strengths and some of your weaknesses, and then pins you to, there's I think like 160 different leadership areas. And for each of those, it kind of goes through it and gives maybe 10 specific ways to work on that. So I found it very helpful in terms of just, someone saying, well, you should do this or you should do that. If you say that, for example, it's being unable to come to a decision. There'll be a page 200, being unable to come to a decision. These are 10 things that you can do to work on that concretely. And I think that really is helpful to have a path to go forward. So the course I went to, which was a week long, really focused on using that resource to actively try to work on your developmental areas, and I'll go through how to do that a little bit of the slides coming up. But a book I would highly recommend. I think it's around $75 or so on Amazon. Even if you don't have the full self-survey, I think the book itself, if you have any sense at all, like many of us do, of what your strengths and what your weaknesses are, it will be helpful to you. And I think, I'm not sure, but I know Dr. Gordon may have been talking about getting it. I talked to Isadora. And so it may be something potentially that you could borrow and return, or at least thumb through to see if you want to buy it before you spend the $75 or so. All right, so that being said, so kind of 4 examples of key domains that really are within the leadership area. So first one being strategic skills. So as a leader, you really have to be thinking ahead strategically. A few years down the line, where do I want my research program to be? What kind of work do we want to be doing? What kind of grants should we be applying for? Or, clinically speaking, how do I want this team to progress? I'm working with this resident over 3 years. Where do I need to get them to be? Or if I'm in charge of a program, where do I want this to be in a year or 2? And how do we get there? Then there's operating skills, which is more thinking in the present. Being able to delegate to your team effectively, being able to manage folks, to motivate them, to go through on the day-to-day, week-to-week. And both of those are crucial. And then finally, interpersonal skills, are so important, as I think all of us know. And they are, something you can work on. I think people have different tendencies, but pretty much all of them are things you can adopt and gain. So, being caring, being approachable, being seen as fair. There's many, many of these traits that really come across well as leaders. And if you don't have them, if you're seen as not caring, not approachable, favoring someone over someone else, that can really torpedo your team's effectiveness. And then finally, leadership courage, which is always a challenge, but being able to confront others when needed, whether it's people working for you or people on your level or potentially even people who are above you. And then also being able to size up people and have the courage to say this person is going to work and we can try, this person may need some help, or this person really is not going to work for this role that they're in, and we have to do something about it to help the team as a whole. And so this text kind of gives some examples, of which there are many. I just put a few here for discussion's sake in terms of common challenges in these domains. So lack of strategic skills, not thinking creatively, making poor decisions, maybe decisions that are focused on the here and now but really are going to do a disservice in the future, that are not really strategic decisions. That's a common problem. Problems delegating, not being able to delegate where people actually have a good sense of what they're supposed to do, being very vague or maybe micromanaging things that aren't the most effective, not prioritizing for the team. You know, if there's a lot of stuff going on, making sure people understand what we do first, what we do second, who's doing what, in what order. Lack of interpersonal skills, not having a sense of humor. I think if you're seen as approachable and someone they can relate to, and humor goes a long way, that helps. If you don't have a sense of humor, that's a problem. If you're not really a good listener, you know, obviously if you're sitting down and your attention is distracted, if a team member comes to you with a problem and you're not really focused on the situation, that's not really what a good leader would do. And then lack of courage, I think not dealing with conflicts up front. If you're aware that someone is not doing their job or is somehow saying stuff or doing stuff that's disrupting the team, that's really a problem. A, because they're disrupting the team, and B, because if you're seen as not doing anything, that seems to signal that this is acceptable for someone to behave like this, or to run their job like this. And the longer that goes on, the more it can be destabilizing to the team as a whole. And so part of courage is being able to step in and do something about it sooner instead of later, which is, you know, as we all know, not always easy to do. Yes?
Question on that one, because one of the things that I see often is someone will go to a leader with a problem, especially if it's interpersonal with another employee.
Mm-hmm.
And that leader then, instead of trying to coach the employee to confront that individual in a nice environment, what they end up doing is going and talking to that person and creating this three-way where they don't actually help to solve the problem. They're trying to have courage to sort of subvert the issue, and they cause more harm than they do good. And I was just wondering what other people's experiences are.
We'll open it up. I think certainly it's good to get both sides of any story. I mean, I think the first mistake is to believe 100% what the first person says is to be the truth. One of the vignettes in the basic science group, and actually we're open to do any vignette in any group, really. Whether you're working in a lab or in the residency, you can do any. But that one has to deal with two people who are arguing with each other and not being productive on the team and having conflicts, and then talks about, and we'll go through suggestions on the best way to get them to work together to advance the goals of everybody there. I agree it's a challenge, but I think, I don't have it off the top of my head, but that is one of the problems that the book addresses. So if you're able to get a hold of it, it can help you with that. Any thoughts on experience with that kind of situation where people have one team member who's saying something about someone else, and then you end up in a three-way kind of, people are smiling, so at least it's something that, people have seen.
So what are some suggestions? I mean, certainly if someone comes to their supervisor or whatever and it's and they don't feel like the issue has been solved, that's a problem.
I think it also makes a difference what kind of problem they're going to. Is it an interpersonal issue, or is it more logistic, job related? Because I think how you deal with them can be very different.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think if it's job related, in some sense it's easier because you can relate to, this is the goal of our team that we've discussed and is known, and if it's someone you feel like someone's not doing the job they should be or whatever, we can talk about responsibilities. But if it's interpersonal, I think, like you said, if someone is talking about someone or doing something that someone else offends them and they're really upset, that gets to be a little more difficult.
Sometimes it's interrelated too.
Yeah, and that's true. It may be tough to sort out. Yeah, but I think, and one of the things that affects it is to really, sit and think before you do anything, to really think about your potential things you could do, how they might work, how they might not work, as opposed to just kind of doing a knee-jerk reaction. I think that's always a bad idea, is to just hear something and then I want to go and do something. It's better to say, okay, this is what they're saying, and they're saying, I could approach it this way, what might happen? I could approach it that way, what might happen? In general, overall, I think that gives you a better way of dealing with it if you're able to step back and look at it from the high view.
This is just such a fascinating discussion, and there's so many scenarios going through my head of experiences that I've had recently. It seems laughing. And one of the things that I've found helpful is, you mentioned we're gonna be doing role playing later on, is I offer that as an option, because I know that helps me personally with my, manager, so I offer that to my direct reports of doing the role play. And one of the tricks, I don't know if it's a trick, but it's called the empathy model, and some of you may be familiar with it. And it was at another sort of communication/leadership seminar that I first was exposed to it, and I put it into action, and it's like magic every time. So I don't know if that's something that I'd love to share.
Sounds sure.
It's a 4-step, and it's much more challenging initially, and it's still challenging for me, but it got easier as I started using it. A 4-step process. So one is stating the fact. So in this case, if I'm role playing, 2 of my people are having an issue, this is the 4-step process that I suggest for them first initially to, assuming that the issue is appropriate for them to address and I don't need to intervene, role playing how they can address it together. So state the fact, yesterday during the meeting you said this. The second step is the feeling associated with it. I felt this, and the key with that is you can only pick one way you feel. So you can't say, I was mad and then disgusted and then you can go on further. So state the fact, state the feeling, and then state what you need. I'm needing clarity. I'm needing, whatever it is that you need, again, briefly. And then 4th is the ask. In the future, would you be willing to come to me first before you go to so-and-so on a work stream that I have ownership for? Or would you be willing to, and then just have a specific ask. I use it like a formula. I mean, like any physics, we're sort of scientific in our approach. And I love it because it's something that I have.
That sounds great. I agree. I think, number one, like you said, starting with facts is always good. This was said, or, this, and very, very clear versus this kind of happened in general. And then saying I feel versus you did this or you did that. I felt this way when you did this, or I felt this way when that happened. Really is much more effective than saying you did this or didn't do that or whatever. And then I agree, and a specific ask is also very helpful. I think that's the kind of approach that, like you're saying, works well.
We have an example in our center, we have an old technician.
Everybody here?
No. Oh, sorry.
Why don't you stand up and turn around
So we have an example
and
in our
say
center.
who you are.
Oh, my name is Jennifer Zhang. Work in UCLA Immunogenetics Center. We have a technician, old technician. She has been working there for 15 years, and she always does the simple work. And she never gets promoted. And then we have a new tech come in, and she's very self-motivated, and she writes the SOP and everything good, and she got promoted. And the old technician was really unhappy about it. So, she complained, it's like I've been working here for years and I never get promoted. So I just want to know how, in this situation, how do we handle this, and how, you see a formula, I don't know what I'm going to say to her, and encouraging her to take more responsibilities, and she seems like it never moved anywhere. She just does everything routine
The same way.
every day.
Sure.
So,
Nassim, did you want to
how
comment on
handle
that, or?
this,
Yeah.
situation.
I don't have a beautiful formula like our people, but the place who actually both the conflict and things like that managed really well has been with using quantitative data or standards. And I feel like, again, that kind of gets it out of the theoretical, I feel hurt, or this doesn't work, or this is unfair, to these are the requirements for promotion. You need to have, whatever. And I think part of the problem in an academic center, unlike the industry, is that we don't actually define very clearly what those metrics are. So if I'm working with residents, it's not very clear what makes a good resident. If I have junior faculty members that I'm working with on a project, we kind of know what the objective is, but it's not really clear what constitutes a really good job on a project. There's not really a hard outcome like getting a grant or something like that. So I think part of it on the side of leadership is to help define those parameters and then hold people accountable to them. So at the end of the day, if you have 2 employees and one is meeting those measures and one is not, then it makes it easier also for yourself to evaluate them. And I know there's the softer side of things and, how people work with each other and things like that, which, again, I've seen people turn into surveys and 360 evaluations and things like that, where you can also have quantifiable data to go on. But I don't know if that sounds too cold, but I feel like the way that I've seen those conflicts resolved well is when you have data that really you can't go back and forth on.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think, it's important to talk about the good work they've done over the last 10 years, and they're very appreciated in the lab and all that. But in terms of, kind of spelling out the kind of things that they would need to do to get promoted, making sure that it's clear that they can do that. So this person got promoted, but I'm not sure what it would be, but if there's this thing and that thing and that thing, if you take these kind of responsibility in this way, those are the kind of things that, we're looking for promotion. That's something you certainly can do, and I believe you can do it, and if you're interested, we can talk about it. That kind of thing I think might be helpful too. So.
I think there's a problem because this person's been there 15 years and has only, done the simple things. Has this person really had an evaluation and feedback? Because most of the time, what happens, either someone checks off something that says, oh, they've done a great job. And if that's the case, if this person has 15 years of they've done a great job, then whoever did that evaluation didn't do them a service by doing that, because they haven't had them, let them improve. And if, but on the other hand, they need that. If someone has said to them every 6 months or a year, well, you need to do this and this and this to get better, which usually is not the case, then they have no leg to stand on. But probably what happened in this case, this person's probably someone who doesn't, who thought that they were doing a good job and they didn't really know what was expected. And the other person is just more motivated, but I think the first person, had a chance and maybe didn't, all that time was lost. So I think the time to do it is 6 months after their job, not 15 years when the younger person gets bumped up.
Yeah, like Kasim said, if the roles aren't clearly defined early as to what they are supposed to be doing exactly, then they may not be doing it and then end up, like you said, 15 years later, really having not advanced their skills at all. But
I was just going to say, to add on to that, whenever I think unhappiness happens in a relationship, at work or really anywhere, it's really the fault of both groups. So you're right, there's something on the side of leadership where they weren't able to appropriately apply that person and help them grow, because again, it is, as you were saying, part of it is looking at your staff and enabling them to grow to the best of their potential. And it's different if someone says that they want to be at that level for the rest of their life versus someone who actually wants to be promoted. And it does really need to be a two-way thing. But as you said, a lot of times we just tell people they did a good job without really thinking about what that means.
all right, so there's plenty of room for discussion later and in the vignettes and even after. I'll stay around for a while if people want to talk about stuff. So fatal flaws. So these are actually things that, there's a whole list of, I think, 30 things that, and this in business, will torpedo your career. So at least the first thing I did in the book was look at those. Make sure I didn't really have any that were that in that list. So really, apparently being non-strategic, not at all thinking about strategy and where you're going. If you just focus on today and tomorrow, it's going to be very hard to get promoted in this institution and to be where you want to be in 10, 15 years. I mean, I think that's without saying. It goes without saying. I guess at least in business, and maybe here too, really aggressively over-managing and being control-driven is going to be a problem. I think in large part because you drive your employees away, or you make the residents really rebel, or there's a problem. I mean, you have to have some degree, we're working with professionals, some degree of training people, giving people some responsibility. If you don't, it's going to be a problem. Certainly being insensitive to employee needs, really betraying trust. Someone tells you something that's personal and as it relates to their work, and then you tell someone else. I mean, that's a big problem. Being arrogant about what you're doing, being very defensive if someone suggests something you can do differently. What are you talking about? All those are pretty much big flaws. And then obviously lack of ethics and values also goes without saying. If you're filling in research data that wasn't there or getting people to do stuff that's not accurate, that's going to be a problem very soon for everybody. All right, so like I was saying, I think hopefully people at least have considered in their head one challenge, I won't say flaw, but something in your leadership style that you'd like to improve. And so first thing is it's really recommended that you get feedback on it. So 360, like Nassim was saying, talk to the people who are your direct reports, talk to your peers, talk to people you report to about that issue and how they perceive that you're doing. And then accept that you need to work on it, that it's not going to come naturally. If we're this age and it's been going on for this long, it's probably not going to resolve on its own. You have to really do something concrete, most likely. And they give really 5 strategies to address these things. And the first one is, probably the best one, to develop that needed skill directly. If you feel like it's, not making a decision, work on ways to make a decision sooner. If you feel like it's not listening well, there's ways to practice active listening that goes over well with the person that's talking. So there are ways you can deal with these things directly. They talk about substitute something else. If it's a skill that really you feel like there's another skill you can substitute for, that may be another option. So people who are not really good at giving oral talks, I feel like they're not, sometimes can pass around like a one-page sheet with the main bullets they want to get at. So people will have that, and they'll be able to look at that while you're talking and hopefully get more of the message you want from what you're trying to say. So thinking creatively about ways to kind of substitute another skill that you may have, if you're able to convey things in writing easily, for example, in that circumstance, with the skill that you're lacking in. And then working around the area of weakness. In business, they talk a lot about getting someone on your team who has that skill. So in research, certainly if your skill is not the statistics, making sure you hook up with a statistician on your team who can help you with the grants, who really knows that very well. You don't have to work on getting the technical proficiency there as long as you have someone who's on the team who can help. That's one way that you can do it. And then sometimes it's helpful to de-emphasize and overuse strength. And one example is maybe you're the kind of person that always has these creative new solutions for a problem. People say, wow, Dr. Smith is great. There's all these creative stuff they keep coming up with all the time that we didn't think about that may work. But if you use that all the time because it's your skill, and maybe there's certain situations where you don't want to reinvent the wheel. There's something that's maybe not creative but is efficient and effective and straightforward. And if you don't do that and you're doing other creative stuff, it may actually be counterproductive. So there are a few cases where really thinking about maybe I'm overusing these certain skills I have and trying to find other ways to do it will be a better way to be a leader. And then they even say at the end, live with it. At least you know you have this deficiency. You've put it actively in your head, so you realize it's going to be a problem and you're able to go forward realizing that versus not acknowledging it. Things like being defensive and all that. If you're not acknowledging it, you're in a much worse situation than if you say, yeah, I tend to be defensive, and I'll realize that, and I'll just go forward with that in my active brain. So again, developing a skill is probably best, but there's a lot of other ways, you can crack a nut or, solve your problem, deal with your challenge. So in terms of the strategy to develop whatever skill it is, so on the slide, for example, we'll say a poor delegator. So identify the problem, number 1, that you don't delegate effectively. Number 2, try to figure out why that is. What are the personal underlying causes? Maybe you know a lot about this task and you don't trust other people to do it, and so you end up doing it yourself because it's easy for you. And that's one of the things that people talk about. Just because something is easy for you doesn't mean you should do it. If someone else can do it pretty much as well as you or almost as well as you, even if it takes them longer, maybe better to have that happen. You can focus on other stuff. If you're doing stuff that's easy for you all the time, you're not challenging yourself. And maybe you're not thinking strategically about developing skills you would need to get to where you want to go. At least in this book and in the course, they talk a lot about reading. I mean, there's been many literature that's been published from a lot of businesses and consultants on ways to deal with these things. None of the problems any of us have are going to be the first time someone has faced this issue. Whether it's, an employee not being promoted and being upset. I mean, that happens, I'm sure, every day, every week, in companies all across the country. So there are people who've dealt with it before and trying to find, in the literature ways that people have dealt with that same situation can only help. And then to develop an action plan, again, you know, sitting and thinking about it. And this is an action plan versus just, this is what I should do. So okay, maybe you'll say, all right, if I'm not delegating well, I need to increase the skill of my team. So I feel comfortable that they can do the tasks that need to be done. And I'll work on that this way. And let me think about the tasks that are not developmental for me anymore, like I was saying, that are so easy for me, I can do them quickly, but maybe I need to identify those, make a conscious effort to have my team work and do those, so I can focus on other stuff that's more challenging and maybe higher level. And they talk about seeking out an assignment that makes you delegate. So in the example here, they're saying, well, it's easy in business, but if you have a company with the foreign branch, volunteer to lead the foreign branch on a task or a project where you can't be there, so you have to delegate. And that'll kind of push you to get those skills to delegate. So, but the main idea is just to get an action plan to think about it. Yes?
I find that really difficult. I've just hired a person who has a PhD as a technician and found out that she couldn't pipette even though she has a PhD in biochemistry. So I am feeding human cells. I'm not going to let that person feed my human cells. So I do the easy job that is easy for me because I can't afford contamination or anything like that. And it's really hard because I was expecting really, I even told the person she can take up projects and figure out things more than a usual technician because she has a PhD. And it's very difficult to then readjust to another level. So the experiments are so precious that you all know you wouldn't want to just let somebody, you know, mess up your samples like that. So it's really hard, and I mean, I finally found a way to have her run Westerns and do only one thing and then like perfect it. But I find it really hard to adjust that and end up doing more myself.
Sure,
and so
sure.
70-80% of my work time is really monotonous work that otherwise would be just wasted.
Yeah, sure, that's right. Well, so I think they would say here, you know, well, I'm sorry, yeah, I'll let whoever was going to comment. Yes, please.
Well, I sympathize with you, but you know, there is a learning curve. So at one point you will have to let that person do something and don't give them the most precious stuff. Use controls, what we call healthy controls, whatever it is, to let the pipette and not to contaminate. You know, I know it's unbelievable that a PhD cannot pipette, but you know, there is a learning curve, so you have to teach. You know, you have to let them do that. Without learning, they will not do it.
Go ahead. I agree. I mean, I think maybe there are ways to set things up that you can test them in a less critical setting. But then there comes a point, which this gets into in this text, that, you know, you have to size up people. I know it's easier said than done, but if you feel like this person, after you've tried things, is never going to reach the level that you need of someone who can support you in your program, then maybe they're not the right person for it, which I know is easier said than once you've hired someone and brought them on and all that. But, go ahead.
But you have a time limit. And so if it's really not going to work out, you can get rid of them without cause very quickly. And you have to talk to HR. It's 6 months.
I don't know if you've passed that already or not. But.
No, and then also you feel like sorry.
Well, you know, yeah, but that's, you know, that's part of it. That's the tough decisions that, you know, sometimes you have to make. So.
I had a similar experience with that too, and I think for me, so this person also had a PhD and had some really glaring deficiencies that were a surprise, and I had to deal with, I think, my own anger and frustration and disappointment, and also then try to see the bigger picture too, because I was so focused on those things that he could do well that I wasn't able to see that there was actually a lot of other things that he's very good at, works very well with other people, and so I consulted with somebody else who knew him too and was working with him and said, you know, what do you think? And that person really helped me see, okay, well, this person has all these other strengths. So at some point I made the decision, okay, I'm going to keep him.
Because you invest time to train them.
Yeah, you have to invest time.
And you establish your personal relationship too.
But sometimes that, I had to get kind of past that feeling of, like, what is wrong? Why doesn't he do this? And to be able to see the bigger picture that this person was probably worth keeping, that I had to invest the time in training him and then accept that and move on.
Well, and they're also learning opportunities because, are those, you sort of assume a PhD has certain qualities, but maybe those things need to be in a job description, and maybe when interviewing folks, questions around their technical, or I don't know if they're called technical skills, or their basics, laboratory skills, next time when hiring somebody, so, if you need to pipette 25 milliliters, what size bulb do you, or whatever the, but, always using it as a learning opportunities to prevent failure next time.
Or ask your references, right? You could call people that they work,
Oh, yeah, of course.
and hopefully they're honest.
That's just
Yeah.
just to add on to what Catherine was saying, though, because I think that's actually a really important point. As someone who suffered from the same problem, what I realized is that part of it is in what that person needed to bring to the table, but part of it was in what I needed to ask as a leader who wanted to work with that person. So I've actually started, based on failures, I've started creating a list of when next time I sit down and I want to hire someone or work with someone, what are the things that I need them, what are some basic skills that I need to make sure they have, because people could have phenomenal references and they could look really great on paper and they have a lot of other skills, but they're not the skills that you need to run what's going on. And I think as a leader, having an idea of what you need and even a checklist for yourself when you're interviewing can be really helpful.
Yeah, along those lines, for those of you who run secondary data analyses in your projects, I was talking to my colleagues yesterday. There's a service, I guess, called Prove It, actually out there, where when you're hiring someone and the last person, and they say they know how to run Stata, there's a way you can get the service to test them to see actually how is their programming on a simple issue with Stata or SAS before you hire them. So that's another thing to think about in terms of being sure you hire the person who can actually do what they say they can do and what your minimal level of expectations are and stuff. So, all right. So I'm about to turn it over to Hawkin very shortly, but just a reminder that,
Real
yeah.
quick, sometimes what I experience, you meet with a person for a day and you let them practice what your expectations are before you tell them yes, you're hired, or no, you're not good for the job. On that day, you're going to put that person to work, practice what you want them to do.
Yeah.
Later on, I
That's
will
right.
call you or whatever you want to tell them.
Yeah, I
So
think
you have a little baseline of what they actually
Can
do
do.
on hands-on
that's
stuff.
right. Because it's such
So
a
they
big
might have-
investment, yeah, that if you want
Can
time
move
spent up
ahead.
front to really make sure you got the right person is,
Yeah,
It's
that's
critical.
For a few hours, 3-4
Yeah.
hours. This is what.
yeah. So thinking strategically in larger scheme of things, that is time well spent when you're thinking about where you want you and this person to be in a year, 2 years, 3 years from now. Absolutely.
I have a general question. How do you to encourage your employee to take more responsibilities? I'm working in a clinical lab, so those technicians have a salary set almost. They have a if you take a more responsibility, doesn't mean you have more salary increase. So those people that don't want to take additional responsibilities. So how we constantly have new projects there, but we want to find a leader, but no one really self motivated. So that's a big question, big issue for a clinical laboratory.
Well,
So
I mean,
how do we do that?
yeah, I'd say in these surveys of businesses, this is what I read, is that, they say that pay is actually not even in the top 10 motivators, which I know sounds hard to believe, but I mean, it's things like, having your boss's approval, feeling challenged, feeling worthwhile in your job, feeling that you're productive. There are a lot of things there that tie into motivation. So if you can maybe find ways to do a lot more positive reinforcement and rewards, or think strategically about how to get them motivated if you can't raise their salary. And again, I keep doing this, but they give a lot of examples in here about ways to do that. So you have to think outside the box. If you can't raise their salary, there's other things maybe that you can do that will get them to take on new challenges. So I think it's
Absolutely,
Yeah.
you can give different types of recognitions. You could maybe send them to a meeting, if they want to go to a meeting where they might learn new skills in terms of clinical lab management. You could send them to a management course. You could, so you could have carrots for good behavior that go beyond salary. And even sometimes just having local recognition for somebody who has developed something new that you can then use in the clinical labs.
Yeah.
And then their peers see that, oh, they're getting, you know, even something really small, like recognition within the group. And then they feel more valued. They actually want to work harder, but maybe other people do as well.
Have you told her that being self-motivated is an important goal for her? And have you set it as a goal? Because sometimes having that discussion and describing how important being self-motivated in your lab is, and starting to ask her questions and letting her solve them. Gosh, you know, if I were going to do this, how would you do it? And start letting her think out of the box, and maybe she'll slowly start to develop it once she realizes how important it is for her advancement.
I have the same feeling in clinical lab settings are very different from research. Just like I say, employees are unionized, their salary is set in a certain scale, you have limited power to change that. And they are licensed, so they are very secure about their job security. Okay, they can get hired anywhere. So it's very difficult. I have the same problem. A lot of people just all come, get done, and go home. Okay, don't bother me, okay? Don't bother me, okay? I get you, you know, my licensed job done. So what do you want it, you know? And I get a, you know, average, maybe not a super, but average thing done. So in that kind of frustration, I had a similar frustration. I don't have like a power to give money to some very even meeting, like going to a meeting, because that's budget approved by somebody else. I don't have the power to approve those. And all the time going to a meeting, they have to be off. Other people cover their clinical service. That you don't have that freedom. So I started thinking about is there any other way, easier, you know, easiest way. I feel like it's really worth it. Just to say, praising that person when I ask that person to do extra thing, I know that's extra, and that person done it and done a good job. I just appreciate it. Thank you so much. I understand it's out of your range. You know, it's not like it's, you know, your job or responsibility or something. I appreciate your work and praise it in front of other staffs. Let them hear I like this kind of behavior, and also I tell their, you know, each step, supervisor, how great this person did. The own job done, and all the additional, the QAs, the quality issues, all these things. She's done a great job on this. And is there any opportunity to promote? Like I said, you cannot increase the salary, but at the hospital is like you have steps. Okay, nursing have steps, each steps. So is there any way can promote this person to another step within their like professional band? Okay, nursing have nursing band, pharmacy have their band, all band. So when the opportunity comes, I'll give a strong recommendation. Say this is the step I prefer. You know, give strong recommendation promotion. Another is other kind of recently I got opportunities like employee award, and also the evaluation. You can give this person exceed expectation. They have meet expectation, exceed. That's only 2 categories. You don't have any category. So you can get all the comments. I write a very good comments about that person, very detailed on the fact. It says she done this on this project, done this is a very fact. In case somebody else get upset, say why she got an award, I don't get an award. I say, hey, here's she done this. Is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20 things. That's very impressive. In the next promotion or award, like a maximum is $1,000. Even though it's not a lot. But I told that staff, I said, I appreciate it. That's all I can give you is that $1,000 reward. And she appreciates that. I think those kind of good behaviors will be rewarded in the future when promotion opportunity comes. She will be the first one. Yeah.
All right, good. So just my last slide here, just to remind you that you know, some skills are easier than others. If we're talking about technical skills and perseverance, those are relatively easy to get in the larger scheme of things. Motivating others, really having patience if things are really upsetting you, having comfort around higher management all the time, those are a little more challenging. And then managing conflict is among the toughest, really managerial courage in tough situations, and then being able to have political savvy when a lot of stuff is going on in your division, department is also, I think, a big challenge for relatively junior folks like we are. So when you're talking about what skills do I need to get and what skills can I kind of work around, part of what weighs into that is how easy the skills are to attain. But it's up to you and how much you feel like you need them and the resources you have to attain them. But it's all, the main thing, and I've been saying it over, is just to really think hard about these things, because it's nothing that is intuitive necessarily. It really requires a plan and thinking ahead. So I think that's the last one for me. Yeah. So with that, I'll have Hawkin come up and give his section of the talk.
Thank you, Dr. Duru. Okay, so I'll be talking briefly about managing up. And people ask me, how did you get into this topic? And I tell them, it's because of my big mouth. It was a few years ago, I was at a division meeting, and the residency program director was asking us there, you know, are there any topics that we should maybe teach our residents in the future? And I said, well, you know, I wish when I was a resident someone taught about, you know, leadership and management skills. And the director said, okay, go ahead. I'm like, oh, okay. So I didn't know much about leadership or management formally, so I looked for opportunities to improve my skills, and so that's how I ended up with Dr. Gordon's office. So fortunately, I was able to go to a seminar, learn a few things. So today, we're going to go over what is managing up, its general principles, some of the communication and learning styles that are out there, and apply managing up to the framework that Dr. Duru introduced to us, the autocratic, the democratic, and the delegative or laissez-faire styles. So what is managing up? You know, if you ask different people, you'll probably hear different things. Some people say it's about stretching yourself. Other people say it's about enhancing your boss's work. Other people say it's about enhancing your value, enhancing your career. In my opinion, I think the bottom line is trying to create a win-win situation between you and your boss. And that means you have to know your boss's goals and objectives. So, you know, it's so hard to change people. I mean, I'm a parent. It's so impossible to change my child. How can you change your boss? You know, you can't control him. You know, I can't control my own child. So, but you can, you know, influence your boss. You know, you can influence your boss in a positive way. And I like to see that in terms of influence, you know, there's a pie. And instead of thinking it's a fixed pie that you're carving up, I see it as with positive, you know, influence, positive managing up, you're creating the pie bigger. And you're having a bigger pie for you and your boss to share. A few years ago, I approached my boss, and I told him I wanted to do a public health degree. And you know, he's a great boss. I couldn't ask for a better boss. He really helped me become a clinical professor, and I give him all the credit for making it, you know, this far. But he was kind of like, you know, what are you talking about? You know, I think he was kind of concerned because he hired me to see patients, to maintain clinical productivity, and to teach residents and medical students. And if I went to this public health thing, I think he was concerned that I was going to maybe reduce my clinical productivity. And oftentimes people, you know, do a degree to jump ship in the future. And I think he was worried that I was going to jump ship. So I put that out right in front of him. I said, you know, I'm not jumping ship. I'm planning to maintain my clinical productivity. I think this is a win-win for the both of us. And after we kind of got that in the open, he was really supportive, and I really had a great time doing my public health degree. So one of the, I think, important skills in managing up is knowing and understanding communication and learning styles. You gotta learn your style, and you gotta learn your boss's style, and try to be in sync. If you look at the literature, there's many different ways to break it down, but the three most common categories you'll see is the people person, the action person, and the information person, or sometimes called analytics. And there's a lot of positives and negatives to each one. We'll go over them really briefly. So the people person, you kind of probably know those people. They're the ones who talk a lot. They're really social. You know, they think talking is fun. They're energized by talking. They talk to absorb ideas. They talk to process new information. They're the persons who are kind of walking around the office, you know, kind of chatting with people. They're kind of walking around, you know, the lab, rooting around. And that's the way they process information. And we just have to accept that's the way they do things. Now, put that person in a meeting. What happens?
That person dominant in the meeting.
Right. They talk a lot. They ask questions until it seems like the end of the meeting. They talk so much. And it's because they're a people person. They're talking to process all the new information. They're talking to process the agenda. They're asking questions. And it's great for them because they're learning a lot and processing a lot, but it's not so great for the meeting. At the end of the meeting, you've only gone through one agenda item and you hadn't made any decisions. Very painful. So you have to be aware if you're going to have a people person at the meeting, what can happen, and be aware that you can kind of, manage that. Action people. I like action people. They're to the point. They learn by doing and then seeing what happened. So they're the types who will do something and then see the results and learn from it. They want to see practical solutions. They want to see immediate results. And, I think a lot of them live by the slogan, it's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. So they'll just do it. If it works out, great. If it doesn't work out and it flops, they'll say, I'm sorry. So put this person in a meeting. What happens if you have a lot of people like this? I like it, actually. It's a good meeting. You make a lot of decisions. You finish early. You have lunch. It's great. However, if there's a lot of preparation for these meetings, for example, you need to review a lot of documents, a lot of papers, a lot of data in preparation for the meeting, they're not going to read that email. They're not going to open up those documents. They want to see an executive summary with 3 bullets. But if you send them a 12-page document, they're just not going to read it, and they're just going to show up at the meeting. So you have to manage that. If they're an action person and you need them to get some information, shoot out a bullet point to them so when they come to the meeting, they know what you guys are talking about. Okay. Information-oriented. I think many of us in this room are probably information-oriented. The training for medical school, the training for graduate school kind of emphasizes this method. We really like to have a lot of data. We want to see the evidence. We're really thoughtful about our decision making. We want to critically appraise what's going on and make a decision. Great for science and for medicine. Put this person in a meeting. What happens? How much decision making is going on? I think these are the people who will say, you know what?
It's not going to work.
It's not going to work, but let me think about it and let's bring it up at our next meeting.
Let's do a study.
Let's do a study. Let's get some pilot data and talk about it at our next meeting. So, paralysis from analysis. So you got to be aware of that. If you're working with a boss who is analytic, make sure you give them lots of data and plenty of time to think about it. Okay? So given the laissez-faire boss, how can you manage up? Well, it's nice having a laissez-faire boss. They assume that you're competent and you have some expertise, and they give you a lot of autonomy and independence. So they'll let you run with it. So if you're in charge of a team, they'll let you run the team any way you want as long as you deliver results. The problems come if you're a new person to the team and you're not sure what's going on and you need a little bit more structure, or you're not sure what you're supposed to be looking up, or this area you're kind of uncomfortable with. That's where you need to work with your boss to ask for structure. Ask your boss to have a more authoritative role with you. Or if you do know something, try to make a suggestion and get some feedback about your suggestion. For me, this was really relevant when I first became a co-course director for the physical diagnosis class. That's a very important class for medical students, and I was so excited to be tapped at such a junior state of my career to be part of this. I really was lucky that I had a laissez-faire boss on this. So he was very hands-off, let me do anything I wanted. So being so energetic and motivated and had big ideas. You know, I prepared all these great small session materials and came to the lectures and thought I was giving a good talk, but everything didn't feel like it was working very well. And I realized, you know what? I don't know anything about education. You know, I have no educational background. I don't know what it takes to run a curriculum or teach well. So I had to really realize this is not going very well. So I had to ask for more structure, more concrete feedback from my boss, and I think that really helped for our course to be doing really well now. Democratic boss. I'm a democratic boss. I like to think of myself as a guy who likes to build consensus, get your opinion, get your feedback before we make a decision. And it's great because it assumes that you have expertise and you're energized by making a decision together with your boss. And it's great because you influence what's going on and you can shape what's going on as well. However, the problem is, consensus building, getting input takes time. And if you have a deadline to get something done, something submitted, and you're busy, your boss is busy, you guys can't get together, it's going to be a problem. And that just becomes exponential the larger your team is. So be aware that if your boss is a democratic guy and you need a deadline to be met, it's going to be a problem. So that's where you may have to ask for a little bit of a laissez-faire approach from your boss, or a little bit more of an autocratic approach where they kind of give you specific deadlines. My office manager actually did this to me. I'm such a democratic guy. I like to get input from everybody in our office, the doctors, the nurses, the front office staff, the back office staff, the medical records person, before we make any changes with our office policies, standard operating procedures. One day my office manager came up to me with a minor change. And she's like, Dr. Wu, can you just sign off on this minor change and we'll just do it? I said, let's bring this up at our next staff meeting. We'll get everybody's input. And she was like, Dr. Wu, this is such a small change. Can you just sign off on it and we'll talk about it later? I'm like, okay, all right. So she managed up on me and it was very effective. Okay. Autocratic boss. So what do you do if you're working with an autocratic boss? Actually, it's kind of nice in a certain way, because they really don't assume a lot of you. There's a clear relationship. One's the boss, and you're not. The boss tells you what to do. As long as you do it, everything's fine. It's a very efficient relationship. However, many of us in this room, we've done a lot of training. We've gone through college, graduate school, medical school, residency, postdoc, fellowship, and it's really not satisfying to be told what to do. We really want our autonomy. So if you have an autocratic boss, you really want to get your autonomy and let him or her give you some autonomy about making decisions. And how do you get autonomy? Jack Welch said, you earn it. That's really the only way you're gonna get your autonomy. And how do you earn it? You have to demonstrate expertise. So if you're a clinician, I would advise really be a master clinician in your area. So what it takes, read up on it, go to national meetings, go to workshops, become a super expert in your clinical area. So when other people have questions, you're the one that people turn to. Pretty soon, your boss will recognize that you're the clinical expert in this area and will start thinking of you as someone who they can trust to be autonomous. If you're an educator, you gotta buff up your teaching skills. Go to workshops, learn about how to be a better teacher, make sure all your student evals are superlative. Otherwise, you're not gonna advance as an educator. For research, maybe I'll defer to Dr. Duru and Dr. Gordon on what it takes to be, demonstrate expertise. Any thoughts?
I think it's the same thing that he just said. is that you demonstrate your excellence. And so I find autocratic bosses to be the most difficult to work with, because I think we're all professionals and we all do want to be autonomous. And especially in the research vein, you don't want somebody telling you what to do all the time. But if you have an autocratic leader, and when we use the word boss, in academics, the boss could be the department chair, could be the division head, could be a collaborator that you're doing work with. And if you have that, you really still, I think you have to demonstrate that you're excellent. You can't butt heads directly with an autocratic boss, because that will end your relationship. That will, especially in the lab, that will end your relationship as quickly as you can butt heads. And so you need to demonstrate your excellence. You have to gain something that they need. So gain some expertise in an area that they need, and then they'll start trusting you.
Any other comments, Dr. Duru? Thank you. Any other comments? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that works, I think, with most people. There are some people, though, who are so autocratic that you won't get that, and then you just have to leave.
Right.
You're probably right. Yes.
I mean, my wife had a boss who, she became an expert in one area, I mean, a world expert in celiac disease, right? So then she, but her boss would sit there and check everyone's labs on all their patients every day. And, and this was after she became an expert, and she couldn't take it anymore. And I told her to leave a long time ago, but anyway, I mean, there's some people who just won't change if they're that way.
I agree.
You find out when you get your first NIH grant, you will see if your colleagues are unhappy about it or happy about it. That's a good way to find out.
Sometimes you have to cut your bosses.
Yeah.
Do you
Yes.
have any suggestions as to how to ask an autocratic boss for these opportunities that come up? Because for me, I work in accounting, so I feel like I'm the lowest thing on the totem pole. Everything just comes to me. I'm told what to do. So even to come to this meeting, I had to beg to let me be here. So I'm like, well, maybe we can find coverage for your clinic. So it's kind of hard. So.
Any wisdom from the crowds?
Well, I think trying to frame it so it's a win-win thing. If you can figure out a way that, what are their objectives, what do they need to do, what's going to make them look good, and somehow work it so the things that you can do will help them and help the organization, would be one way if it's possible to do that.
I think that's a great suggestion. I learned at a workshop that I went to a number of years ago. There was someone who was from the business world, actually from a business school, and she actually worked it around so she got her boss to think that it was their idea. So she decided what she wanted to do, but she presented it in a way that this other person actually believed that it became their idea that she do this. And so, that's sort of convoluted, but it can work, especially with that type of leader.
Yes.
Why we should make somebody else feel that that's their idea and they take credit for it? I would suggest that if your boss is so dysfunctional, just leave. I think.
Well, that's one way to do it.
You have to value yourself. This is like staying in a dysfunctional relationship and learning how to manipulate it. I think you have to learn what your value is and just move on.
I think it's a good point. I think it depends on what it is. So in that setting where I said that this was a professor in the business school, and it was the dean of the business school. The professor in the business school didn't want to go to a different business school. And so she had wanted to do something with the course she was teaching. And she knew that the dean wasn't going to allow her to do it unless it was his idea. Sometimes you need to decide where to pick your battles and when to pick your battles.
I think a professor in a business school who is going to be at the level of creativity and giving all her ideas to the dean, I think. I mean,
This
she's-
wasn't giving her ideas to the dean. This had to do with a class she was teaching, and she needed to make sure that it was that person's idea. So it wasn't that the dean was taking credit for creativity that this person was giving them. It was basically that she was going to be allowed to do what she wanted to do. And the only way to do that was to get this person to believe that it was their idea, to let her teach that class in that way. It became a win-win because she was able to teach the class. She gained his respect because she not only taught the class but had rave reviews for the class. And so the reality is that we do encounter autocratic leaders. And the question is, what is your bottom line? If you feel that you can get another position someplace else easily, that you would love,
and
and
maybe go above the boss's boss.
very hard to do that.
No, but I mean, I would like you to also
Yeah.
look at that. What would be because
Sometimes, oftentimes that, we're gonna do that in role play. Let's let you do that in role play and let's see how it plays out with the group.
Okay, just wrapping up. So managing up, I see it as a way to enhance yourself and your boss, creating win-win situations by knowing your boss's goals and objectives. We talked a little bit about different communication and learning styles and how having a different type of boss, laissez-faire, democratic, or autocratic boss may shape the way you approach things. So this is the resource that we had referred to by Dr. Duru. And that's the end of our presentation. Thank you.